Most people think medieval guilds were all about craftsmanship, pride in their work, and how artisans protected quality in a tough, pre-industrial world. That's the image we've inherited. It's comforting, organized, almost idyllic. But it's not the whole story. Guilds didn't just protect the craft, they controlled the markets. They decided how much you could charge and earn, who was allowed to work and who wasn't. They set prices, capped wages, restricted access, and they quietly controlled the flow of money in entire cities, often more precisely than kings ever could. This wasn't just a side effect of medieval life, it was the system itself. Welcome to the Monada, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is as simple as it seems. To really understand guilds, you have to step back into medieval Europe between the 11th and 15th centuries. After centuries of division, cities were growing again. Trade was booming. Coins, they returned to everyday life. But the central authority was weak. Kings were rulers in name more than in practice. Law enforcement was patchy. Markets were unstable, and trust was fragile. In this kind of environment, something had to bring order. Guilds popped up as officially recognized groups of people doing the same trade. Bakers, weavers, masons, goldsmiths, carpenters. They got charters from city councils or monarchs that gave them exclusive rights to produce and sell within the city walls. In return, they promised stability, consistent quality, predictable prices, skilled workers, and social support for their members. And at first it worked. Guilds solved real problems. They made sure bread wasn't tampered with. They checked weights and measures. They trained apprentices in skills that took years to master. They looked after widows, covered funeral costs, and helped their members when they were sick. In a world without modern insurance or regulations created guilds that inspired trust. That's the part people usually remember. What gets forgotten is what happened when trust turned into power. Because guilds weren't labor unions like we think of today. They weren't there to stand up for workers against capital. Actually, they did the opposite. Guilds were controlled by masters, shop owners, not apprentices or journeymen. The ones making the rules already owned the tools, workshops, and had political clout. Workers didn't negotiate with the guilds. They were completely under their control. Once a guild took charge of a trade, they openly and clearly controlled the prices. Price lists were posted. Undercutting was forbidden. Selling outside the approved channels meant fines, confiscation, or being kicked out. The reason given was stability. The result was the formation of cartels. Take Florence, one of the richest cities in medieval Europe. Its wool industry was dominated by the Arte della Lana, one of the most powerful guilds in the city. They decided who could make fabrics and what quality standards had to be met. They decided how much wool could be used and at what prices finished goods could be sold. Florence's wealth didn't come from free competition, but from controlled mass production. The Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths in London did something similar. They regulated the purity, prices, and who could access precious metals. Quality control was important, sure, but just as important was keeping outside competitors out. Monopoly and legitimacy went hand in hand. Baker guilds all across Europe set the prices for basic food staples. In theory, this was supposed to protect consumers from crazy prices. But in reality, it just kept bakers' profits steady and shifted the risk onto others, like grain suppliers, workers, and anyone who wasn't covered by the guild. And then there were the wages. The guilds didn't fight for higher pay. They decided what the wages would be. Apprentices were tied to the guilds for years, sometimes a decade or even longer. And they worked long hours for little or no pay in exchange for training and the chance to move up. Journeymen got set wages with hardly any room to negotiate. Starting your own business meant you needed permits, fees, citizenship, and often family connections. Skill alone wasn't enough. You could be great at your craft but still be shut out from owning a shop for life, because approval mattered more than talent. Entry barriers were deliberately put in place. Tuition fees went up over time. Training periods got longer. Membership requirements became stricter. Many guilds completely excluded women, migrants, religious minorities, and rural workers. Not out of obvious malice, but to protect the income of existing members. That's the key point. Guilds didn't become restrictive because they were morally corrupt. They did it because of monopoly power. Stay tuned for part 2.